Hey everyone, and welcome to the overview of body composition. This will be a bit of a review if the stuff in lab, depending on the order of the semester, the body composition stuff of lab has already been covered or not. However, we there is a heavy tie between the two, uh, but this will give you a little bit of a deeper understanding of how some of the body mass index stuff will relate to obesity, and then how obesity rates tie into overall health and well being of our population, in particular in North America. And then we'll also discuss how body composition a little bit in regards to sport and performance. And we will go from there. So, first up, we'll call back or discuss our anthropomorphic type measurements that we do. And as a reminder, that's a measurement of and the study of body size and composition. So when we're talking about body size, we're talking about our total body mass, height, our different circumferential measures, so arms, legs, torso, hips, waist, our bone breadths, or to a similar degree, bone density, and then limb lengths as well. And we'll I think there's some sense and understanding, just for most of us, if we know or follow sport, that depending on who you are and what your body type is, generally, and I shouldn't say body type because that makes it sound very solidified and finite, but depending on your anthropomorphic measures, um, there's different sports that are a bit better suited for you and performing in there. And I think just calling to that is important. For example, if we think of a good physiological build for a runner, typically they'll be fairly low total body mass in general. So again, just the amount of mass that they carry around, whether it's muscle or body fat, is generally quite low, and that's in particular true for endurance running. The reason for that being any extra mass that you carry around on course, because you're supporting your own body weight and needing to move it, it becomes extra work essentially that you need to do. So that becomes something that we'll notice is particular about that sport and the type of physique, if you will, that is well suited for it. Then we can have larger players. For example, in football, some of the positions require more mass. That's a good, beneficial thing. And some of the time, although we see a different trend in the NFL now, it is good to have both muscle mass and fat mass on you, because that allows you to tackle better. It gives you better stability and having more mass lower to the ground. And so we'll find that in certain sports. Sumo wrestling would be another example where just having sheer mass is going to be beneficial. And then we have sports where you're like volleyball or beach volleyball in particular, where it requires a lot of anaerobic, quick type movements. So it's really important to have a lot of muscle mass to be able to generate a lot of force. But you also want to keep your fat mass, or the amount of fat on your body, lower to allow those explosive movements to translate to velocity or speed, as well as allowing you to, say, get a good vertical jump at the net to spike or block. So again, we come to find that each sport has its own maybe a preferred or supported type of body structure or physique. Okay, so that will lead into the next topic, which is something called body somatotyping. Again, I want to try to put emphasis on this, that when we talk about body type, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are set at that particular body composition forever. Okay, there are definitely tendencies for certain groups of people, just both based off of genetics and lifestyle choices, to have a certain physique. But that being said, while we can't change wholly our genetics, we can influence them and make lifestyle choices that will influence them, and lifestyle choices that will change and influence our body physique. So certainly, I'll give a couple examples of this. But that being said, I believe when we discuss how different body builds, let's say, uh, are definitely better suited for certain sports than others, it can be helpful to have this sort of language. So somatotype is a category of human physique according to contribution of three different elements, and those elements tend to be the body build of people. So when we have I think it's best actually to see the photo here. I'm going to scoot ahead. So when we look at the three somatotypes, we have our ectomorph, a mesomorph, and an endomorph, and similarly represented here for males and females. And the thought behind this is each of these types of builds have certain characteristics and qualities about them, and this tends to be a bit of a tendency for these individuals. Ectomorphs tend to be like leaner, somewhat taller, very little muscle and fat mass on them. When you are speaking about mesomorphs, tendency is to have more muscle mass and less fat mass on these individuals. And lastly, and not least, we have endomorphs, which tend to have more body fat mass on them, potentially some higher muscle mass too, but somewhat in a relative sense, proportionately less than a mesomorph. And again, each of these body types tend to be suited for a certain type of sport. Now, I want to speak to a little bit of a trend currently in the fitness industry that's being sold to people, where there's this idea that you need a very specific type of either training, exercise training, or nutritional intake, depending on what sort of somatotype or body type you are. And I want to make a strong suggestion that this is largely just marketing and trying to streamline certain people into certain sales funnels, because ultimately at the end of the day, what's going to work for some people will generally work for most, as far as trying to, say, shift your body composition in one direction or another on the scale. It's always going to be some form of nutrition and exercise. It all just kind of depends where you are, and where you want to take your body composition. Okay. Right. So that's somatotyping. I think the biggest thing to take away from this is I just want awareness of it, not necessarily to say that this is the thing, the way to go, as far as trying to, let's say, body type people. Because I've definitely seen ectomorphs become mesomorphs, mesomorphs become endomorphs, and vice versa in all directions. And those changes take time, obviously, but and changes, but it happens. So I digress. That's enough of that. Moving forward, I've used a lot of terms so far to try to describe these physiques and body types. Haven't defined them yet, so let's do that now and make sure we're all clear. I think most probably have a good idea based off of the language that I was using and how I was using it. You probably have a good understanding of this, but total body mass is the entire mass of the body. So that includes fat mass and fat-free mass. So fat mass, a bit straightforward. It's the amount of, or total mass of fat that we have on and in our body. But fat-free mass is all the non-fat tissues. So that includes things like our digestive organs, skin, nerves, etc. But generally, if we want to speak specifically about muscle, we'll say lean muscle mass or lean mass or muscle mass, sorry. And ultimately, we take our total body mass and we take our fat mass and we make a percentage of that. And that's how we get body fat percentage. Now, on that note, I think a lot of people, it helps. They want to be able to have a picture of roughly how much body fat percentage looks like what. Because we're exposed to so much media in and around this, so I think it's good to just have an idea, especially when you might be having clients coming to you and having certain ideas or concepts in their mind that may or may not be accurate. And it also gives you a starting place, I think, if you're working with clients, to have a general idea of where, even before measuring, which is always the way to go, where your client may or may not be as far as this. Now, again, we'll speak to this a bit later, but you'll notice at the low end for males and females, males are quite a bit lower than females, and this is definitely the lowest, healthiest range typically that you'd want to go ever. Mainly due to different energy requirements of men's and women's bodies. But that being said, yeah, we'll discuss that just a little bit later. But it is typical for women, and women should have a higher body fat percentage. Okay, so that's not an error there. Okay. So again, when we're talking about body fat percentages and fat-free mass and fat mass, we don't really take into consideration this really commonly used metric, body mass index. Okay, and in reverse, the body mass index does not take into consider body fat percentage. And oftentimes, when there's a discussion about the BMI relative to taking body fat percentage into consideration, people like to harp on the BMI because it doesn't do this. But ultimately, there are for sure benefits to using the BMI. One of them is it is a relatively, for sure, a cheap way to administer a health screen or health stratification, because all you need is weight and height. So you need a scale and a tape measure, which are relatively cheap and easy to get and easy to administer, fairly non-invasive. And we do get a good correlation. Again, correlation is not a direct specific measure or causation, but we do get a good idea of obesity and obesity rates, underweight status, as well as a general indicator of potential for body fat percentage. So it is useful. And again, if we're taking a look at these sort of stratifications, we see that we can get a gauge for an individual that might be underweight by putting their weight over their height. Their weight over their height squared, and normal, overweight, obese, to 3 different levels of stratification. Okay, so when we're speaking about obese and obesity and obese individuals, we're speaking specifically about a BMI of 30 or over. Okay, there's no other definitions there for that. Okay. Now, again, as I spoke to before, there is an argument and a valid point made that it is not exactly true necessarily that when someone has a high BMI, that they're necessarily based or necessarily have a unhealthy body composition. Again, that pulls from the point of body fat percentage, right? So we'll find that when we're talking about obese individuals, I'm going to go back to that slide in a moment. again, it's anything over 30, but overweight can be 25 to 20 to 30 as well. And it is a significant issue. The stats here from the United States, Canada's a little bit behind as well, but is a significant cause of mortality directly, but also indirectly. And I mean, we can see that 70% of adults are within this overweight to obese percentage, and half of those are obese, right? So it's very, very prevalent, and certainly an epidemic that's current. I think having an idea of the trend, and if you look back to the data that they have from the 70s, it's even perhaps a little bit more staggering. But the increase that we see here from 1995 on to 2018, where a percentage of over 35% of these states are obese, right? And we see a quite significant trend starting in 2005 from about the south and mid states. In certain states, we still see increases, some regression. Um, but that trend generally keeps increasing for these areas. So very, very prevalent. And why do we care about this? Well, for example, these are associated with obesity. This wouldn't be like a direct cause considered for obesity here. So, this would be the related diseases. So what we have is cardiovascular disease and atherosclerosis, which is a cardiovascular disease, hypertension, which again is similar, but we have negative effects of a blood lipid profile. So that would be cholesterol, high cholesterol, and in particular bad cholesterols, like low density lipids. We have type 2 diabetes, again causing strain on our endocrine system and energy system. That way, sleep apnea. Sleep apnea, I think, is an interesting one in the sense that it's quite literally associated with the weight of the person's body restricting their breathing of their lungs and their rib cage, which from covering the respiratory system is diaphragm relaxing. You need to allow that volume of your lungs to expand in order to allow air in. So when you're sleeping, the weight of the person's body restricts that negative pressure to allow air to be drawn into the lungs, and therefore experience sleep apnea. Osteoarthritis, it's a joint condition, complications during pregnancy and surgery. So that's everything from logistical complications to physiological complications that occur. Most hospitals have equipment that can are suited for individuals, say like over 300 pounds, but again, sometimes those resources are limited. I would suspect maybe in and cancer comes up from this, gallbladder disease and gout. Gallbladder disease, if you recall, I guess we didn't cover the digestive system. So with a gallbladder, it essentially produces a substance that has enzymes that breaks down fats in our digestive system. So without that, or issues with that, can cause everything from blockages to ruptures to a lot of issues that way. And gout again is a joint issue that causes significant inflammation and pain within joints of the body. So a bit of a laundry list needed to go through each of those, because I think is really important to highlight all of the diseases that are associated to and precursors to the mortality of individuals who are obese. And I think calling back to this, when we look at, yes, individuals with a total body mass can potentially not fall on the correct stratification here on their BMI. As an example, myself, I tend to be just kind of into the overweight category versus normal. However, like my body fat percentage is quite lower. So, at a same individual with a body mass as myself, but a higher fat mass, again, as we might argue and debate, should probably be considered overweight because carrying a high amount of body fat is associated with so many diseases, right? Okay. Okay. So what causes obesity? And I think, uh, yeah, I think typically there's a lot of discussion whether it's uh, largely genetics or largely lifestyle or but I find like most things in science that have support for both cases, it's usually a multifactorial thing where there's lots of um, influences. So depending on who you are as an individual will determine that largely. So yes, genetics is part of it, but I would say even with that as a component of obesity and obesity rates, ingesting more calories than you're expending certainly is and a well supported thought of a cause of obesity. Now, more physiologically speaking, there's some individuals that have inability or a challenge producing something called leptin, which is related to hunger and appetite, satiation or fullness. There's alternations in appetite control, which can happen for a lot of individuals due to psychological um, influences, but also physiological changes in our bodies day to day. Physical activity is probably largely related to this ingesting more calories than expending. The new smoking is inactivity, right? So, sitting disease, as a lot of us over the past few years have increased in our screen time or sitting at computers and doing our work that way. Um, and that's been a steady increase for probably a couple of decades now. And then, of course, cultural factors. So, again, related to the first point, where we just have an abundance of high calorie foods and high fat foods, but we also have well, and related to that is kind of this drive, primarily in the United States, to become one of the largest food producers in the world. So there's this big push to be able to support and increase the amount of food they produce, but they also needed to therefore have producers be able to sell this, and so there's a big push in marketing as well to um, yeah, get individuals to purchase more food, buy more food, etc. So um, a lot of that has a lot yeah, a large influence on our cultural and media influences on why individuals tend to ingest more calories. But also, again, in the States, and I think if you've taken a trip down south lately, you probably recognize fairly quickly that most portion sizes there for sure are larger than what we get here in Canada. So again, a bit of a cultural influence for our friends down south in particular, but here as well, um, at some restaurants for sure. Okay. So again, when we look at obesity, it's classified as a disease, and if we look at the causes here when treating a disease and trying to take that perspective and that lens of it, there are a number of different ways to go about it. Usually, one of the more conservative treatments or approaches is to try to create a exercise and diet routine or program. However, one of the challenges with that is when we have, and again, relative to someone who has a lot of body mass, when you try to reduce significantly the amount of caloric intake, one of the things that can occur is actually slowing of metabolism. So reduced calories decreases metabolism, and um, not to mention the, say, like psychological or physiological cues of having a restricted nutritional intake. It's really, really challenging to maintain. So that's a challenge for obese individuals. There is an option for bariatric and weight loss surgery, and I haven't I know someone who performs this quite regularly, and the results typically are quite good. So with bariatric surgery, what happens is there's a few different ways of it. One of the more classic ways is essentially putting a band around the stomach. So when you eat, you actually feel full a lot sooner, um, and therefore you don't eat as much, and therefore lose weight. However, when you're approaching or heading into that option, you typically need to prove that you've been on some sort of exercise and diet program for some time. You've been able to lose some certain amount of weight, and then you get accepted into that, because you still need to supplement your treatment with lifestyle changes. And that goes very similar with pharmacological agents or drugs. And there's always seems to be some new drug coming out that helps with weight loss. But again, dieting and exercise usually needs to be in there, and generally helps or generally has similar results as well, but without the benefits of physical activity. So if you take just a pill, sure, you might have the weight loss, but you don't have all the psychological, social, and mental benefits that come with exercise. Exercise and diet, yes. So together, this, as far as the treatment, has proven so far out of a lot of options to be a good option for some, in the sense that you can again combine versus just doing a nutritional plan alone. They showed to have about 20% greater initial weight loss than, again, just undergoing a diet changes, and there tends to be about a 20% sustained weight loss 1 year after, relative to just making nutritional changes. So again, and this was a systematic review and meta-analysis done in 2005, so not the most recent now. There's probably more information out there, but at that point in time, there had been a sufficient or a good amount of research done to allow that research. So again, I think net point here as far as treating obesity is there are surgical and drug options. Generally speaking, I try to go a more conservative route, because you need to do that even for surgical and pharmacological treatments, exercise, and nutritional planning. Yeah. So that's kind of looking at the general population. We'll kind of switch our view to more of, say, a sport or athletic perspective. When we're looking at performance, so higher level performance, athletic performance, and body composition, generally the higher percentage of body fat, then fat-free mass, we usually see some decreases in some way, shape, or form as far as performance, depending on the metric you're looking at. And I think the biggest thing is you actually do see a bit of a reduction in peak oxygen consumption, or your VO2 max. And so depending on what sport you're doing, again, it's really important to keep that in mind, is it will vary the degree to which having more fat mass will influence your performance. Some sports will actually encourage it, and there's actually a lot of sports where if you have too little fat mass on you, it can be detrimental, and we'll speak about that after in one of the later lectures. Okay. Great. So that was our first overview of body composition.